expert in his field, Paul Pawela, is with me. We're going to talk about something that our denomination has really been after us to do, and that is church safety. With the advent of shootings that have gone on in the church and different events that have taken place, we need to address safety for a congregation. And so we want to let you know what we're doing and allow you to come join us for training, if you will. And I want you to know this man's accolades are so long, his qualifications are so long, that if I begin to name them, I will probably mess that up. So I'm going to introduce Paul, who's been a trainer for 30 plus years?
38.
38 years. And so he's trained everybody. He's been deployed with SEAL Team 6, been deployed with Delta. And so thank you so much.
No
I told you I'd mess it up. So anyway, we're going to talk about some things because it's very critical that we have an understanding who does what. We're going to deal with situational trainings and situational issues. Not today. We're going to talk about them a little bit today, but if you come to the training, we're going to train your team so that you will know how to survive an attack and also get you ready for the ensuing probable court battle that could go on, and how to avoid things and be ready so that if you step into that arena or forced into that arena, you know how not only to protect your congregation, but also to protect yourself in a court of law. So without further delay, I want to introduce my friend, Paul Pawela.
Sir, it is such an honor to be here. I can't thank you enough for having me. Thank you.
So let's get right into it. And one of the things you and I have talked about on several different occasions was the shooting that took place in Texas and some of the things surrounding that. Now, let me set this up, and then you can jump in at any point in time that you want to. In a matter of 6 seconds, there are 3 people dead.
Preliminary reports said that he entered the church and sat down with parishioners. He got up from that position, pulled out a shotgun, and fired it at a parishioner. That parishioner is deceased. There was a security team inside the church, and they eliminated the threat.
This church had its own security team. They were well trained. This team responded quickly, and within 6 seconds, the shooting was over.
We just want you to know how to be prepared should something happen, because the young man that came in, he had on a jacket where he was concealing a shotgun.
Yes, sir.
And then he went in and he sat on the back, towards the back on the right-hand side of the church as you're looking at it from the pulpit. And he got up, walked back, and then he began shooting people. And fortunately, they had a well-trained team that was able, and one of the gentlemen was a former law enforcement, and he was able to pull his weapon, and from 36 feet away, shot the man and took care of the situation. Let's talk about that a little bit and what a church can do to be ready.
Well, this individual that was the assailant, he had been a suspect he had been on the radar of the church security team for a little while. And what happened was when he came into the church, he had a trench coat, which was big red flags right off the bat immediately. And then, like you said, he ends up pulling a shotgun, and people heroically tried to do certain things. There were some failures, and I will never discredit the hero that ended up giving his life in that. But you could see on the video clip he was going for his weapon, and he couldn't get his weapon out of his holster, and he paid dearly with his life. But what he did is give time for the hero of the day, as it were. His name was Jack Wilson, and he was able to end that confrontation in 6 seconds, drawing from the holster, getting an aimed headshot at, as you had stated, 36 feet away, and put the individual down and rescuing the entire congregation from any more damage.
There were 242 people in that building.
Yes, sir.
So the potential for massive chaos and massive violence to go on was very real, and it could have been much worse.
Absolutely.
The thing that was also, and where I want to lead this conversation right now, is what followed, because Mr. Wilson, who actually did the headshot, was then turned around and sued by the congregants. Is that correct?
That is correct. Before we go into the civil litigation, it's interesting, and if we look at documented cases throughout the entire United States historically, starting with the gunfight at OK Corral, after that gunfight took place between authorized law enforcement officers against a criminal element, after that gunfight took place, those officers were arrested and went through not one, but 2 trials for murder. If we go in our state to the FBI shootout, where 2 madmen who had a history of killing and robbing people got into a gunfight with FBI agents, seriously shot 6 of them, 2 died, 4 were seriously injured. The hero of that incident, Agent Edmund Morales, he was waiting for over a year to find out if he was going to be prosecuted or not. And the same thing happened with Jack Wilson. The prosecutor decided, because it's a political venue, decided to drop the charges about a year later after the fact. And then the irony was, because of the post-traumatic stress that certain church members induced, they filed a civil tort action against Mr. Wilson based on that trauma that they caused him, when in effect they should have been thanking him for the rescue that he did.
Now, I know that one of the things that we're going to supply to people is paperwork that will go in their file that will help with really both of those situations. Is that correct?
Absolutely. One of the things that I was shocked about was that the
Congregation.
pulpit, the congregation, thank you, had the audacity to bring charges against him. And I thought, well, anybody that's doing a church security team, and there's a lot of them. I happen to know one of my mentors was a former SEAL Team 6 member, John Rhea, and he was the number 2 guy for Pat Robertson's bodyguard team. So anybody that's in the business of protecting church or church members, and there's armed people that are in the church, then yes, everybody needs to be aware that we're going to deal with the situation as appropriate and needed. And if it goes to deadly force, then the church needs to understand that, and they need to know the consequences of it, and they need to free any of the church security and or the pastor and its members from any kind of form of liability.
So we need to talk about those types of trainings that we need to do. Also, in most churches, in our church, specifically in our church, we have two separate buildings, one for the main service and then one for our children. And so one of the things we're going to be dealing with is situational, who does what. And it's the same thing, but also this will not only just apply in the church world, but if we get into a situation at a house and it's you and your wife, and you and your wife had some situations that's actually one of the reasons we consider him an expert is not only his ability to train, but the documented cases where you've actually had situations in your home where you had to at some point in time tell somebody to cease and desist.
Yes, sir.
And so you want to share that, just a little bit of those experiences so that we can kind of know where that might be going?
Sure. I'll do a reverse order with Linda. We were going down to we were going to Virginia to see my daughters, and we stayed in a hotel in Georgia, and they didn't have on Yelp that this was a drug-infested area. So the hotel that we were staying in had just that. They had drug dealers there, and I was too tired to do anything. Long story short, there was an argument between two women that were peddling the drugs and the two people that were receiving the drugs. And a couple of lessons learned is they end up slashing the people that were buying the drugs for whatever the transaction went wrong. So they started slashing the tires of the vehicle that was right next to mine in front of my hotel room at around 2:30 in the morning. So I had anticipated trouble, and I was armed with an AR pistol, and I had gone out and held these guys at gunpoint. My wife is on the phone, 911, and she's telling the police that they need to get here as fast as possible. And what a couple of things is she said, I'm at the hotel at this particular exit. And they said, well, which exit? And she didn't know. So that was a very learned point, because there's hotels on every exit. Right. So we just didn't know the exit. My point of view, as a big comic book kind of guy, I like the comic book characters Punisher and Deadpool, just for the sake of the television and movies that they've made out of them. And my wife thought it was cute to buy me Punisher shorts, which I had on at the time, which could have been a disaster if there had been a shooting. Because I'm like, okay, I reconsidered that wardrobe, and it is now discarded from my wardrobe from that point. But a very serious complication could arise in court had I had to go and shoot those individuals. They end up dropping the ice picks, and they hauled, and they were apprehended by the police later on. But at the end of the day, no one thinks of those kinds of things, of the aftermath of what happens after you are possibly in a self-defense situation or a deadly force encounter. In my opinion, we're in the latter days, for sure. So the whole thing is preparation. And if we can look at ourselves as bodyguards, and we're our own bodyguards, then the order of the day is not to get into a confrontation at all. So if we start with learning what the signs are, then we can pinpoint the dangers and then hopefully avoid those dangers altogether. Because if it goes to guns, to where somebody has to go to a gun for deadly force purposes, then we failed in our mission to begin with, I think, because we didn't see the dangers ahead of time. And they're always there. A lot of people if you see on the news, there's like, we had no idea that this guy, what are you talking about? There were signs and cues all day long that they were there. From the Virginia shooter to the Pulse shooter to Mr. Wilson's church, the signs were overwhelming. It's just they didn't pick up on them, or when they did pick up on them, they didn't react fast enough on them.
So the red flags that we're talking about, I think one of the big things is knowing your congregation,
Sure.
knowing who's coming in, watching for strange attire. Certainly a trench coat in the middle of the summertime
Absolutely.
would be a red flag going up, something to that effect. And one of the things that we have, you can't frisk people, but in the church world, you can hug somebody.
Sure.
And so you'd be amazed at what you can learn about people in a hug if it's situational.
Well, going back to Mr. Wilson's event, one of the heroes that got little to no attention, excuse me, was a woman in the church that had 2 children, and she sensed danger. And from her vantage point, she moved her children to the far corner of the church away from the guy in the trench coat. And I thought, who is better and alert more than moms with their babies? So she picked up on that very well, and very little airtime went to that woman, because everybody should have been doing things just like she did and picked up on it. So when we talk about training, we have to talk about specific types of training that we need, that are specific needs for what we're doing in our church. And the problem that we saw in the Wilson incident is, after the fact that the shooting was done, what you saw is a whole bunch of people draw guns that weren't trained to draw guns, and they were pointing guns at people that they should have never been pointing them. And under stressors, when we clench our fists, our finger is usually on the trigger, and that usually can cause accidental or negligent discharges. So those are kinds of things that not only the security team needs to be highly trained, but if an emergency situation is in the church, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an active shooter, but somebody's coming in to disrupt the church, or somebody is, we have had protesters as of late come into the church and just interrupt the church. Well, okay, the people in church need to know how to deal with those people. The security team needs to know how to deal with those people and escort those people off property. And again, that's a red flag to go ahead and start having your protection team unfold and do their job. But the church members need to know what to do, when to do it. And that's why it's so important that there's, as I have pointed out before, if you consider like a Special Forces A team, they have, on a Special Forces A team, they'll have 2 medics, 2 engineers, 2 weapons guys. They'll have a NCOIC in charge and an officer in charge. Well, and communications people. So those people need to be doing those roles in a critical incident. Not everybody in the church congregation needs to be dialing 911. What needs to happen is that team leader or the communication specialist needs to take control of that, so there's not a flood of 911 calls going to dispatch and chaos and pandemonium's going on.
So we don't want to overwhelm the system.
Absolutely.
By just everybody picking up the phone and dialing it. And so that's really critical. And so, one of the statistics I heard, I was at a gun show last month, and when I was there, they said in the month of January in the state of Florida that 20 million guns were sold. I don't know if that's true or false, but that's what we were told. And 20 million guns in a state of 22 million people being sold means there's a lot of people who's never owned a weapon before who's out there with one. So one of the things we want to do is make sure that people have proper training, because the last thing that you want to do is, as you pointed out, grab a gun, have an accidental discharge, and kill somebody. That's the worst case scenario. So we really need to be clear on what we should be doing, how we handle guns and those things. It's very important. There was a time when Jesus said, he said, I've sent you off before just by yourself, don't worry about things, but now's the time to go get a sword. And so now we're moving into an era where we may be in that arena. And the Bible says that there's time and season for all things. And I think we're in a different season in America than we've ever been in the church world, and I'm almost 60 years old, and I've never seen the church having the challenges that it has today. You know, one of the things that people need to understand is there's quite a difference in what an individual does versus what like the SWAT team or the police or when you're in an infantry unit, how the training goes.
So I break down the aspect of where the trainers that are teaching their skill sets to different audiences. And they usually come from either the military, a lot of them from the special operations community, like Delta Force or SEAL Team 6, which are our two of our counterterrorist teams in this country responsible for counterterrorism. Law enforcement officers are also teaching both retired and or current active duty law enforcement officers, which I'm not a big fan or proponent of those individuals because a lot of law enforcement officers, they can't hit the broadside of a barn with a gun, and B, they have a badge. So they're automatically, when they're talking to a civilian audience, they're totally exempt and different from the rules of engagement between law enforcement and civilians. So the category of instructors that I tend to acquiesce most of my information from is the personal protection or / bodyguards, because at the end of the day, we're bodyguards to our families, to our church members, to our friends. We're there to protect them. And so those skill sets that I lean toward is, of the different categories of instructor, I lean toward the types of skill sets that the bodyguard has, because they're highly skilled in medical training. Mm-hmm. They're highly skilled in organizational skills, getting their clients to and from their destinations from point A to point B with limited time. They're highly skilled in etiquette. They're highly skilled in defensive tactics and firearms. They're highly skilled drivers. Mm-hmm. So can we learn from all of those and use those skill sets in our own individual lives? And I think the answer is absolutely yes.
You know, one of the things that you mentioned is being able to treat somebody on the spot, and so we actually have a trauma awareness and situational teacher that is coming to help us to understand how to field dress a wound, how to stop bleeding, those kind of things, because traumatic incidents happen. Listen, it doesn't have to be a shooting. It doesn't have to be, somebody coming into your home. It could be you pull up to an accident and you need to know how to treat somebody, and you could save lives. So we've got that coming up on March 20th. I think it's going to be a great event. You might want to attend that and learn how to treat somebody that's very injured. Absolutely.
And I have to say, Eldon Tate, who's one of the most phenomenal instructors I've ever met, she's just Miss Marvel as a human being. She was a former retired firefighter, EMS, EMT, and now is a certified RN in Trauma Hawk. When there's an accident on the scene, they grab her, they take her in a helicopter, and she goes in and does her thing. And she is so phenomenal to the point where it's so basic of the things that she does. It's just incredible. And I'd like to make a point on that, is if we look at how many people died at the Pulse nightclub shooting because they bled out. They just absolutely bled out. No one knew. And you had the fire rescue one street over, but because of the scene, the chaos that was going on, they just didn't have the ability to stop the people that were bleeding, and some of those people died needlessly because no one knew how to just put a direct pressure on a gunshot wound.
So yeah, I mean, something as simple as the other day, we were walking in a grocery store and our grandson was with us, and he turned around and walked right into the buggy, the cart that was there. and split his lip wide open, and it could have been a bad situation. Fortunately, that we had some first responder training in one of the companies I was with, and so I was able to, and my wife was able to get him settled. And of course, it kind of was rough to look at. My wife said, "I feel wheezy," so we got her set down, we got him taken care of, and when it was all said and done, everything was fine. But it could have got to be a bad situation really quickly had we not had some training from days gone by. And so triage is really what we're talking about, and just learning how to be in that moment and take care of a situation, because you never know when your child's going to do something that's going to result in an injury where you're going to have to know what you're doing. And
absolutely. We just had in Orlando a person go crazy on employees with a machete and hacked people up pretty badly. And you can do a machete will do a devastating wound, terrible. So it's good to know how to treat that real quick, real fast. And like you said, just everyday nuances that happen with children and whatnot, because it's important, because again, we're bodyguard, and our husbands should know how to treat their wives and kids, and vice versa, because if the husband goes down, who's next in line as the bodyguard?
Right.
So
and Pastor, let me just say this: things happen in churches all the time. If it can, it will go wrong at some point in time. It can't. It's a matter of when. Most of the time, before somebody gets injured, gets hurt severely, and you need to have a response team that can actually take care of that situation as well. You need to have a medical bag that's on the premises, so that you will know how to respond with that, so that you can tape somebody up, that you can stop the bleeding. And while 911 is on the way, because even in best response times, where we're at, we're probably 5 to 6 minutes before somebody could get here, and that's time enough for somebody to bleed out. And so we've got to know what we're doing. And yes, we use the name of Jesus, and yes, we believe in healing, and yes, all those things. Yes, that's our first response, but we can have proactive movements while we're also waiting on them to respond. So I think it's very important that maybe you get to this training on the 20th of March. So I think we're starting at 10:30 a.m. that day.
yes, sir.
And let me again go over some of the reasons Paul is very qualified. 38 years as a trainer.
Yes, sir. National trainer.
National trainer. He is in the Hall of Fame for martial arts, correct? These are not 9 situations where you've personally had to be involved in stopping criminal activity
As a citizen.
As a citizen.
Yes, sir.
And I think one of the most important things that you're going to learn is his approach to hostage situations, which if somebody comes into the church with a gun, you have a hostage situation. Or if they come into your house, you have a hostage situation. And what to do in those situations, very, very important. And because of his practical knowledge, not approaching this as Delta Force, even though
Correct.
you've been deployed with them, not approaching this as special ops, even though you've been deployed with SEAL Team 6. That's great. That's all well and good. One of the things that you spoke about when we taught the initial course at my church was how many rounds each one of those people on those teams shoot per year, and they all had one thing in common. Even though that was the case, there was one person that was killed accidentally during training.
Absolutely.
On each one of those, and so they're shooting 100,000 times a year. All that's great, but what do I do as an individual? What do I do if I just came? And so having somebody that is that qualified, that level-headed, and going to teach you how to respond, not as SEAL Team 6, not as Delta Force, but as a citizen, a civilian at home in your situation, very, very crucial. So there again, I can't tell you everything, but this man really knows what he's talking about, and I think it would be a good idea, Pastor, for you to bring your team to hear what this man of God, and let me emphasize that too. One of the things I'm a fan of is he's not just an expert in his field, but he's actually a man of God as well. And he loves the Lord with all his heart. And so he's going to do everything in the best interest of the church. And one of the things that you're going to see is how respectful this man really is to everybody. He's not putting on a show. I've observed him for some time, and he treats everybody as just with great respect. So I want you to know you're going to be safe here. You're going to be safer when you go home as a result of coming to the training. And so we want to invite you and just let you know that you're going to be all right in Jesus' name, but get some training. Is that a good idea?
I think it's a wonderful idea. Yes, sir.
Amen. So God bless you. If you need to contact us, we'll put the information up on the back side of this. And matter of fact, it'll probably be up most of the time. So you can contact us, and we'll give you the dates of the training that are coming up. And we'll be doing this ongoing from season to season. In our church, we're going to run about a 10-month program so people can go all the way through and get about 80 hours of, I think it is, of training that we've designed, so that those people can come back, and each time they'll get different certificates, and they'll actually be that much more prepared.
Absolutely certified, so they can take that to court if need be.
Yeah, so anyway, God bless you and keep you. Thank you for joining us. Consider what we're talking about. It's very, very important in this day and age and in this time like no others. And we know we're in the end times. And even so, come quickly, Lord Jesus. But till he does, we have to occupy until he does come. God bless you and keep you.